Hello there. UFC 296. There she went. What a fascinating event that was. Fascinating card up and down. Right off the bat, the initial few fights, we saw a number of spectacular finishes. Stock of some fighters went up, stocks of some fighters went down. We saw a few fighters who are nearing very, very close to retirement. Tony Ferguson, very likely. Wouldn't surprise me to see Stephen Wonderboy Thompson hang him up. Fantastic call out by Colby Covington to call out Stephen Thompson. It's a fight, a winnable fight for Colby, and you have a number of call outs that were made throughout this card. Some questionable. So let's talk briefly about what went down at UFC 296. By the way, thank you for tuning in. We have a number of folks joining the stream as we take a look back at UFC 296. So thank you for taking time out of your Monday night. No more UFC this year. The card's done. Over 40 UFC events done. Oh, man. So we have a little bit of a break here. Let's take a brief look at UFC 296 and what went down. First fight of the night where we had Shamil Gaziev, who beat the brakes off of Martin Buday. Buday just didn't seem like he was ready from the opening bell. Gaziev laid it on him, laid the lumber for what felt like an eternity. And you had Buday couldn't get going, got beaten to a bloody pulp, and that was all she wrote. Gaziev, congrats to those who were able to cash on Gaziev at plus money in that spot. Solid bet on your part. I picked Gaziev, but I didn't end up pulling the trigger on a bet. In hindsight, I would be better served playing Gaziev in that spot, but that ship has sailed and can't go back in time. I don't think we'll see Gaziev as a underdog in his next matchup. I'll be interested to see who the UFC ends up giving Gaziev. And then Martin Buday. Man, goodness gracious, as I'd like to say. He's got a lot to go home and think about at the end of the year here. Then the second fight of the night, where we had Andre Fili, who looked spectacular when he disposed of Lucas Almeida. Almeida didn't move his head off the center line from the opening bell, and Andre Fili stood in the pocket with him and let him have it. It was a beautiful finish. Great post-fight speech. And also, if you were able to listen to Andre Fili, he put out a video recently stating about how his focus and his mindset has changed dramatically in recent years, where he used to just love to fight for the money, and he loved the feeling that he got from winning. But now it's much deeper than that. That's a beautiful thing. And you can apply that to all aspects of life, not necessarily just inside of the 8-sided octagon. So proud of Andre Fili maturing before our eyes, and very impressive performance from him. By the way, before we get further, I'm sure you all caught the Dricus du Plessis, Sean Strickland dust up in the crowd. That was something that got the blood flowing. I was a little caught off guard to see the UFC put Sean Strickland and Dricus du Plessis in the same section, only a couple of rows apart from one another. And Sean Strickland had the wherewithal to send Gilbert Burns's kids out of the way as he went out of his way to jump basically Dricus du Plessis. And that was fascinating stuff, because there's no real repercussions here. In fact, now you'll likely see pay-per-view sales for the UFC 297 card go through the roof because these two tangled, but it wasn't necessarily two fighters tangling. It was, if you watched the replay, Sean Strickland pointed his finger as if he was firing off a gun in Dricus du Plessis' face, and then he jumped him, basically. That's what went down. And I honestly don't believe that Dricus du Plessis even knew what was happening there. He wasn't. I don't think he was prepared for the fallout there, and he ended up trying to secure a takedown, and everybody separated them. But the animosity, the build up here to this fight, it has a strange dynamic because you saw Dricus du Plessis in the press conference really lay into Sean Strickland in a way that we haven't seen other opponents do. They haven't taken that tactic, and it obviously affected Sean Strickland greatly, and it's something that I'm sure he's still thinking about right now. But I'm concerned. I'm concerned about that fight. I'm concerned about the aftermath of UFC 297. I don't think this is something that's going to end quickly, and it's amazing how Dricus du Plessis was supposed to fight Israel Adesanya, and Sean Strickland gets the title, and here we are. And now that the buildup, the animosity here, it's really something else. So looking forward to that fight. Just new dynamic though with the the chips have been put on the table, and there's a lot of animosity there. So we've got DDP versus Strickland, more interesting now. Still like Bobby Knuckles over both of them. Well, Bobby Knuckles had his shot against DDP and was unable to get it done. Now, let's talk a little bit more about some other fights that took place. So we had Tagir Ulanbekov, who, yes, he had his feet, his toes in the cage while he was putting himself in solid positions to lock up submissions, and he had multiple submission opportunities there. And Cody Durden, how about that first submission escape that he pulled off? Very impressive. And he lasted longer than I thought he would. Durden was able to land on Ulanbekov, but couldn't take him out of there. It was an interesting fight. You saw the heart of Cody Durden. That's no question. Cody Durden's got a lot of heart, but also he couldn't really compete from a skill perspective on the mat. You saw Ulanbekov, the way he was able to initiate and execute the takedowns. It was a thing of beauty. But I will say this, Ulanbekov, every time I watch that guy fight, it's like he plays with fire, and that's a dangerous thing. It seems like he's within a strike or two of losing a fight at any given moment. He's just so thin and frail for that 125-pound division. I'd like to see him compete at 135 pounds. Next up, we saw Casey O'Neill get throttled, and I mean throttled, by Ariane Lipski. That was a fight where you see the coaching from American Top Team and how much of a difference maker it can be at times. And there are a lot of fighters. They find a great camp, a coach that works for them, and look at Ariane Lipski's early UFC fights and how she was TKO'd. I think she took a TKO loss by Antonina Shevchenko. That's a bad look. And you look up and down her career, I know had success in KSW, but she's turned it around here and has turned a corner. So I'm really liking what I'm seeing there. And then Casey O'Neill getting bludgeoned and battered all across the octagon. It seemed like even in the Maya fight, she was falling in love with her stand-up, and that's not really who she is. She needs to be an alley cat out there and take the fight to the mat by any means necessary and grind out opponents. But you saw she was a fish out of the water on the feet, and she was a fish out of water against Jennifer Maya at times. I know the end of the fight, she poured it on there, but wasn't very impressed with with Casey O'Neill's performance. She had no answer, and at 125 pounds in the women's division, how often do you see ladies with that level of success on the feet? And it was like O'Neill's head was bouncing back like a Pez dispenser. That wasn't a good look. So, not sure where she goes from here. To be honest, O'Neill, we know she's had knee injuries, and there was an account on my timeline that was posting about O'Neill still suffering from injuries. Now let's talk Cody Garbrandt taking on Brian Kelleher. I thought this was a fantastic fight, and this was a play that I made that I went live on the broadcast, and it was 1 unit. Garbrandt Kelleher fight doesn't go the distance at -145, and I thought that was a solid play there. Painted a nice picture of what could play out. And one thing that I got to give Brian Kelleher a lot of credit, because he went out on his shield. A lot of fighters weren't willing to do that, and we've seen it many times in the past. Even most recently at the previous card, Chris Gutierrez, when he faced Song Yadong, you saw Chris Gutierrez fight not to lose. He didn't want to be finished. It wasn't like he was fighting to win. He didn't put his chips on the table and go for it like Brian Kelleher did. Kelleher was landing nasty leg kicks on Cody Garbrandt and put himself in the fire. And that's one thing I have a lot of respect for Kelleher. You saw a tweet earlier today that he was daring to do great things and to go big, and he went for it. He dared to be great. And yes, he got caught and dropped and finished, but you have to be willing to try to win the fight. And Chris Gutierrez wasn't willing to do that. Yes, he did go 5 rounds with Song Yadong. Some may claim that that's a moral victory, but he didn't attempt to win the fight. And Kelleher did. You look at the aftermath of that fight, and you saw Cody Garbrandt's shin and leg were extremely swollen, and Garbrandt could barely walk on the leg. And also, if you watch the finishing sequence, Kelleher was landing. They both landed at the same time, but it seemed like Garbrandt was a bit in the pocket more than Kelleher, and was able to land the kill shot there. So props to both fighters, and props to Cody Garbrandt too. I got to say this, that, he's been gun shy in previous fights, and here he faced his demons and was trading in the pocket against a power puncher and came out on top. So both fighters deserve kudos there for their efforts. I was very impressed with both fighters, to be honest. Thanks, Scott. Yes, growing out the beard, getting ready for winter in the Great White North over here. So appreciate you. Garbrandt versus Figueiredo would be a fun matchup. It's interesting how Garbrandt called for that fight. That's a dangerous fight, though, man. I don't know if I could see the UFC rebooking that. Right, that fight was originally supposed to happen, and folks were laughing at that matchup because they knew about Garbrandt's chin issues, but Cody's a talented fighter, man. He's talented. It's just a shame that he's been popped on the button many times in the past. And I also think how many times in the past in that Team Alpha Male training room has Josh Emmett landed on Cody Garbrandt when they were training? That would be, oh my gosh, can you imagine that? I wonder how many fighters how many training partners Josh Emmett has knocked out throughout the course of his career. That is wild stuff. And we'll talk about that fight in a couple of minutes. But first, let's talk about a war that went down. By the way, if you wouldn't mind subscribing to the channel here, and also dropping a comment in the comments section and liking the video, that'll be a big help for us. We are growing the channel organically. I'm not one to go out and ask for followers. This is something that I think has to happen organically. So if you are clicking the subscribe button, it is greatly appreciated. And let's talk Aldana versus Hossa. This was a fight where you saw Irene Aldana last time out against Amanda Nunes. She was humiliated. She was beaten to a pulp, and she came out, was getting that lead leg chewed up by Carol Hossa early and often. That was a wild, wild first round. And Aldana was just taking the damage. It was as if she just didn't, she neglected preparation for that kick, or she didn't respect the low leg kicks of Carol Hossa. And look what ended up happening. She had her leg busted up, and she just kept moving forward. By the way, Diego Lopez in that corner, they've got Lobo Gym's got a great thing going, man. They are on fire right now, doing great things. Alexa Grasso and a bunch of fighters in that camp. So Carol Hossa, she stayed with it. I was impressed with Hossa making it across the finish line. Both fighters were beaten and brutalized, and you saw the picture in the hospital afterwards of both of these ladies. It was a war. Probably fight of the year. You think it was fight of the year? If you wouldn't mind sharing your opinion in the comment section, we could chat a little bit about that. But I was impressed by that fight. And then here's another fight that got my blood boiling. I'll be honest. I watched Alonzo Menafield taking on Dustin Jacoby. Dustin Jacoby comes out hot in many of his fights. He's a kickboxer by trade, but when the crucial moments happen, he's now throwing kicks. He's keeping his hands down, trying to fight at range, and he can land on the feet, but then when punches come back at him, he gets caught by these power punches. And it's interesting to me how it happens so often. We've seen it in his last fight, and man, I can't. You watch the Khalil Roundtree fight, and was it Gurziev? I forgot that guy's name. There was a sequence at the end of the third round in multiple fights where he gets caught against the cage and ends up grappling when he should be trying to create space to strike. I know Menafield had rocked him, so perhaps that's why he was clinching. But you also have to realize that Jacoby's strengths are his kickboxing and his striking, not necessarily his grappling. You watch back that Iwan Kudalaba fight. My God, it was like watching somebody toss around a Cabbage Patch doll. So just Dustin Jacoby, horrible fight IQ. I'm trying to prevent myself from criticizing too much because I have a lot of respect for his abilities and also Mark Montoya. And gosh, that was just a bad look. And these are moments when Jacoby looks back at his fighting career. He's going to see that he left these wins on the table. These were winnable fights. The Roundtree fight, I thought he won that fight, made it much closer than it needed to be. And this fight in particular, this was another fight where Dustin Jacoby could have won this fight. Without a doubt, he could have won this fight. Menafield just caught him at the right time multiple times, and sad. It's sad what happens to a fighter who's nearing the end of his road. And I'll be honest, at this stage in his career, it wouldn't shock me to see Dustin Jacoby get cut or retire. Now, let's talk Josh Emmett versus Bryce Mitchell. We saw Bryce Mitchell. It's interesting. He shared his perspective during an interview right after the fight. He put out a video where he said that he made a big mistake not attempting to take Josh Emmett down, and he was fighting off of his back foot, something that we rarely see. You saw Josh Emmett circling, and then land that kill shot, and that is partially due to Bryce Mitchell not being the aggressor, and it cost Bryce Mitchell big time. I was on Mitchell, played 1.5 units at -195, and the key here is I was under the impression that Bryce Mitchell was going to come out and have a grappling heavy game plan. And he stood and he didn't shoot a takedown, didn't get the opportunity to do to shoot a takedown because he got completely obliterated. One strike, one and done, and that was it. That was all she wrote. And we've seen Josh Emmett put out opponents in the past brutally, but this one takes the cake. This was the most brutal knockout I've ever seen. I've been watching the fight game since the early 90s. Perhaps Overeem's knockout loss to Francis Ngannou, that was up there. But this one, you saw Bryce Mitchell seizing on the octagon canvas, and the way the medical team didn't respond in a timely fashion, and they let him walk out of the octagon under his own power. That was a dangerous situation there. And when you talk about someone who's suffered a traumatic brain injury, it was a bit disturbing. Oh, wow. Pepe is here. Hello. Great to see you today. Thank you for tuning in, sir. I appreciate you. Did you think that was an early stoppage on Mitchell? Hey, how about this? Did you catch Bryce Mitchell's video that he put out today? And you saw there was a response on Twitter from Josh Emmett. And basically Bryce Mitchell said that Josh Emmett would have killed him if he landed an additional strike and followed up. And I believe that's a possibility. Early stoppage, I don't necessarily believe it was an early stoppage, unless there's mortality involved. We have to err on the side of caution here to a certain extent. Pepe, I thank you for taking time to make this thoughtful and insightful comment. It does raise some questions though, because Josh Emmett, and I think was it Herb Dean who was the referee here, who was walking in the opposite direction when Bryce Mitchell got caught by that strike. Thank goodness Bryce Mitchell didn't take another strike, because that would have been a disaster. So glad he's back. He's got all of his wits, and yes. I realize that Pepe is a good guy. I've been on a show with him before. Yeah, I saw that. He thanked Emmett for not following up with ground and pound, and also said he doesn't remember anything until like 30 minutes after the fight. Yeah. And Mitchell, I will say this. I think that this could potentially have been a life-altering knockout. I know he's coherent, and he's speaking, making coherent thoughts, sharing those with the world. But I also wonder if he gets caught by another strike like that. Now, we've seen him get caught by Ilia Topuria, and man, Mitchell's been taking some damage recently. He was in there with Dan Ige, also heavy hitters. So let's give Mitchell a grappler next time out. Now, let's work our way up the card. Then let's talk Tony Ferguson versus Paddy Pimblett. First of all, it's clear, crystal clear, Tony Ferguson should have been retired about 3 or 4 fights ago, but he's still marching forward. And even today, put out a statement saying that he still is continuing on with his career. I don't think that's a great idea. And you watched the beginning of the 3rd round when cardio's king, right, for Ferguson, and you had Pimblett, who was gassing out. His nose was bleeding, and there was a moment in the beginning of the 3rd round where Tony Ferguson, or most lightweights for that matter, could have pounced on that opportunity and taken Paddy Pimblett out, but he couldn't do it. And it that irked me a little bit to see Tony Ferguson on his back for what seemed like an eternity. He was stuck on his back, had no plan to get up. Wow, Pepe. Oh my gosh, that is a phenomenal call. Wow, you redeemed yourself right there. Mitchell versus JSP. You have manifested this matchup. I want to give you kudos here, and I'm all for that matchup. I'll be interested to see how that gets lined too. I have a feeling that Mitchell will probably be um, a minus 200 or so favored, and then the line can move from there. But we'll see. We'll see. So Tony Ferguson, comfortable playing guard, and everybody talks about his rubber guard. When was the last time that was effective in mixed martial arts? I mean, it poses a threat, but no one respects it. That's the thing. Um, they should release Tony for his own health. That's the right thing to do. We've been talking about it long enough, but I think now is the time for Dana White to take action. Well, those conversations can be they can be had behind closed doors, and I hope they do. I hope they do. You know, I've met many great fighters both during their prime and after they retired, and it seems like some fighters they're at ease. You look at George St. Pierre and the way he's conducted himself after he left the fight game, and he made a clear statement that you want to leave with your health. You want to plan your retirement. You don't want to think about people forcing you out of the fight game, because a lot of these fighters, they have that killer instinct, that mentality that they are there to overcome adversity, no matter at what the cost. They will just push through. But man, it's hard to accept when it's over. And 7 consecutive losses, and he's losing to Patty Pimblett, who's not a very talented fighter. That's sad. And man, it's very sad, very sad. Really hope Ferguson doesn't make his way into the, oh my God, bare knuckle. Oh my God. Goodness gracious. I haven't said goodness gracious in a long time, but I got to be honest. There's so much scar tissue there on Tony Ferguson. I'd be concerned if he was to go bare knuckle. Now, let's talk Shavkat Rakhmonov taking on Stephen Thompson. But before that, everyone's talking about the Bilal Muhammad path to the title. Every time I hear Bilal Muhammad's name and I watch him fight, I think John Fitch. He wins and he pushes forward, and he has what a lot of folks view as a boring style. I know he had the Sean Brady TKO victory, but what can you say? He likes to push opponents up against the fence. He likes to use his cardio as a weapon, and it isn't very pretty. And what he did to Stephen Thompson and others, Luque, etc., it's not pretty. But John Fitch just found a way to win, and that's the thing. Against Gilbert Burns, I was at Gilbert Burns' fight against Bilal Muhammad. I had money on Bilal Muhammad there as an underdog, and people in the crowd, they were booing Bilal Muhammad because they just couldn't stand his fighting style. I was talking to the people around me in the section that I was sitting in. People were just not a fan of his style, and that's unfortunately, if you're not marketable, you don't get title fights, or you have to put up 10, 11, 12 fight win streak together to get this title fight and an opportunity. And then you have Shavkat Rakhmonov here, who he's an extremely dangerous fighter. He's unpredictable. You saw what he did. Did you see the pictures of his ankle and how his ankle was blown up, and he didn't throw out any kicks in this fight? He took a grappling heavy approach. And I got to say this too. He didn't go out of his way to brutalize Stephen Thompson. He did it in a methodical fashion, and it was a beautiful finish too. It's beautiful. Rakhmonov, extremely dangerous. He's getting better and better and better, and he's only 29 years of age. So if you ask me, I say give Shavkat Rakhmonov the title shot at 170 pounds. I don't believe that Bilal Muhammad should be fighting for the title, regardless of what folks may say. Yes, Tony does have that warrior mentality. Let's see. Muhammad's grappling has to be far superior to Colby. I give him a fair chance versus Edwards. Yes, I will say that. Hey, he could potentially win the fight against Edwards. That is Bilal Muhammad. I think that if you watch back the no contest, Edwards, I believe, is the rightful favorite and should win that fight. But I also think that Shavkat Rakhmonov could torch and brutalize Leon Edwards and make Leon Edwards do things that we haven't seen him do before. You watch Colby Covington, who was washed. I mean, it's clear that his fight against Edwards, that was not the same fighter that we've seen in previous matchups. Even the Masvidal fight, the pace, there was no pace on the part of Colby Covington. Let's see. He was nice to Thompson. Yes, I believe Rakhmonov was. And let's see, Marcus. Great to have you on board, Marcus. I appreciate you popping in here. This is helpful to have you in here, and look forward to enjoying a beverage out in Las Vegas soon. So you say that Shavkat versus Usman is the fight to make. Bilal deserves Leon. I say, you know what? If you want to do that, perhaps maybe we've been too harsh on Bilal Muhammad, and that he deserves this title shot. But I also can't get out of my head how Leon was landing that piston left hand on Bilal and causing him trouble, landing kicks, etc. Bilal has better wrestling than Shavkat. Okay, but the submission game of Shavkat is a real threat. Just think about Bilal trying to shoot these takedowns and putting himself in danger. Both Islam and Shavkat would rinse Leon on the mat. I agree with you there. Bilal is the next champ. Leon sucks. All right, we've got some Bilal fans in here. Pepe, what's up, man? I've seen your podcast before. Look at this. We've got some folks saying hello to each other in the chat. This is a good thing. I appreciate this. So the key here is, now everybody's talking about the ankle injury of Shavkat Rakhmonov, but all right, let's get that fixed. You know, it looks like it might take a few weeks, possibly a month or two to heal up, but when's Leon going to fight again? Okay. And also Bilal versus Rakhmonov. Come on. These guys have been avoiding each other like the plague as well. That is a fight that should have happened. And I believe that Rakhmonov runs right through Bilal Muhammad. I would pay to watch that fight. Hopefully that gets booked. Now, let's talk this is a bet that I lost. This is a bet that I made back in September, the Brandon Royval selection against Alexandre Pantoja. And look at this. The lack of get-up game, the lack of improvement on the mat, the unwillingness to sacrifice himself was the demise of Brandon Royval. You saw the takedown ability of Alexandre Pantoja and the dominance once he gained top control. Also, once he found the back as well, but the top control and the transitions. Did you see that? How Alexandre Pantoja was just flowing all over Brandon Royval. That was very, very impressive. Lightning quick transitions. And it just reminded me that Pantoja, if he's fighting an intelligent game plan, he can hold on to this belt for a while. The key here, though, is sometimes, and you saw in the Perez fight, he came out like a gangbuster, and he came out like a gangbuster early here too. Went straight for Royval, and the cardio held up down the stretch. You saw the fifth round, Alexandre Pantoja was hunting for those takedowns, and he was getting pieced up on the feet. But the key is that 39% takedown defense on Royval's part was his demise. Mark Montoya. Now, we've seen this with a number of fighters over with Mark Montoya. Unfortunately, Chris Gutierrez, Alexander Hernandez, Brandon Royval, Anthony Smith, Dustin Jacoby. That camp's had a pretty rough run in recent years. Cody Cody Brundage, I believe, is their shining light right now. Goodness gracious, what is going on in Colorado? So we took a 1 unit loss on Brandon Royval at plus 205. Got a solid number there, but that doesn't mean squat if it doesn't cash. I know a lot of folks they're proclaim themselves, oh, CLV this, CLV that. In the long run, it helps you win. I'm not a huge believer in that. Pantoja is a legend. Yes, I agree. I was pulling for Pantoja to win, Mike, but I actually scored the fight for Royval. Wait, what? Are you trolling me? Pantoja got takedowns, so very little damage. I believe there was a 50-45 there. So I don't see how Royval won the fight. He did there were a couple of rounds where he started to get ahead, and then the key here is the fight IQ of Pantoja. He was able to finish these rounds strong, and that's something that Royval he wasn't willing to sacrifice himself. And you saw, here's a big point too, that Royval wasn't going for submission over position. He was sticking with position, with the position, and didn't lock up the choke. He attempted a couple, but then would focus back on just maintaining that position. Royval, no chin or no takedown defense. I wouldn't necessarily say no chin. I know he's been rocked a few times, but I don't believe that Royval's chin was the issue in that fight. Not trolling you at all. You were surprised with the 50-45. Well, I would say it was a closer fight than odds suggested. Now let's talk the main event of the evening, where Leon Edwards came out, and it wasn't a pretty fight. It wasn't a pretty fight against Colby Covington. And before that, you had the Dricus du Plessis, Sean Strickland scrap in the crowd. And let's just talk about that very briefly again. I know we spoke about it earlier in the pod, but I think that, yeah, by the way, did you see Sean Strickland looks like he's added a bunch of muscle in the lead up to this scrap with Dricus du Plessis? I really like that fight. I'm looking forward to that fight. And I think that is going to be a wild card fight where adrenaline is going to likely kick in the Dricus du Plessis Sean Strickland fight, and I think that there's a realistic possibility that that Dricus adrenaline dumps there. I think that his title aspirations are clear, and Sean Strickland, that guy is a savage, and he's a cold. He's an assassin, man. It's almost like he doesn't feel emotion when you're watching Sean Strickland fight. He just feeds off of other people's energy. And this is something he's been fighting like this his entire life. So it's a dangerous fight for both fighters. And let's get back to the main event of the evening, where we had Leon Edwards and Colby Covington. Covington, unfortunately, washed. I know he wants Stephen Thompson next, but that was a bad look, man. That was a real bad look. I feel like those were wolf tickets, as Nick Diaz would say. The pace wasn't pushed, and I don't know if Covington was injured or not, but that was a very strange, peculiar game plan. Peculiar choice of game plan for Colby Covington. And Edwards, he fought calculated. He fought in methodical fashion. And what was interesting is he was trying to get the takedowns back on Covington just to prove a point. You could see the competitor that he was, the competitor that he is. So the Covington who fought Usman a couple of times and who fought RDA and who destroyed Masvidal, I don't think that was the same fighter that we saw on Saturday night. I think that the end of the road is near for Covington. I wouldn't be surprised if he just talks a good game and walks away from the fight game. To be honest, he probably has a solid bank account, and I stayed away from this fight from a betting perspective, but I picked Edwards, and there's something about the long layoff for Covington, and then to get Edwards's deceased father involved here. I know Dana White said that the pay-per-view sales went up, I think 25% once that line was mentioned in the press conference. That made a huge difference maker. But it's sad. It really is honestly sad that these grudge matches propel pay-per-view sales. The sanctity of the sport to me is very important. Martial arts should be about respect and seeing who pitting skill against skill, and not necessarily going out and trying to get revenge on somebody. But hey, it sells tickets and it puts fannies in the seats. So interesting bout. Now, where does Edwards go from here? I think personally that Shavkat should get the title shot, but if you want to give it to Bilal, it is what it is. And then is Usman coming back down to 170? I don't know. I don't know if he's sticking around at 185. Interesting. So thank you guys for popping into the stream. Remember, go get what's yours. And by the way, I know we finished this is six consecutive winning years, and let's make it 7 in 2024. Third party tracked. So pick your spots one fight at a time and enjoy the rest of your night. Go get what's yours and have a great rest of the day. Thanks again, folks. If you wouldn't mind hitting that subscribe button, and we'll keep grinding, brother. Take care.